Okay, we're up to chapter 7. So, as I say at the beginning and end of each chapter, think about what you have read so far. You've read 6 chapters, either by yourself or with me. They have just got off Hogwarts Express. They've made their way with Hagrid leading them all the first years. So, please think about everything that has happened so far. Think about your 3 main ideas. Is there a theme coming through in the book that you are beginning to notice the focus on besides wizards and witches? Think about any new characters you have discovered so far. Remember, feel free to pause the video if you want to jot down ideas, or if I pose questions during the chapter, to pause it so you can actually think about the answers to further your understanding of the text. Chapter 7, The Sorting Hat. The door swung open at once. A tall black-haired witch in emerald green robes stood there. She had a very stern face, and Harry's first thought was this was not someone to cross. "The first years, Professor McGonagall," said Hagrid. "Thank you, Hagrid. I will take them from here." She pulled the door wide. The entrance hall was so big you could have fitted the whole of the Dursleys' house in it. The stone walls were lit with flaming torches like the ones at Gringotts. The ceiling was too high to make out, and a magnificent marble staircase facing them led to the upper floors. They followed Professor McGonagall across the flagstone floor. Harry could hear the drone of hundreds of voices from a doorway to the right. The rest of the school must already be here, but Professor McGonagall showed them the first years into an empty chamber hall off the hall. They crowded in, standing rather closely together than they usually would have done, peering about nervously. So knowing that you can hear all these voices in the room next door, knowing you are going to be let in, you might have a time where you can make a text-to-self connection about when you attended grade 6 graduation. If you do something like scouts or calisthenics or a sporting event out of school hours, you might find a time where you were waiting to be called in. "Welcome to Hogwarts," said Professor McGonagall. "The start of term banquet will begin shortly, but before you take your seats in the Great Hall, you will be sorted into your houses. The sorting is a very important ceremony because, while you are here, your house will be something like your family with Hogwarts. You will have classes with the rest of your house, sleep in your house dormitory, and spend free time in your house common room. The 4 houses are called Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw and Slytherin. Each house has its own noble history, and each has produced outstanding witches and wizards. While you are at Hogwarts, your triumphs will earn your house points, while any rule breaking will lose house points. At the end of the year, the house with the most points is awarded the House Cup, a great honour. I hope each of you will be a credit to whichever house becomes yours. The sorting ceremony will take place in a few minutes in front of the rest of the school. I suggest you all smarten yourselves up as much as you can while you are waiting." So think about, for someone like Hermione or Harry, Ron would have some idea about what happens at Hogwarts because all of his older brothers have gone there. Hermione, who is a muggle, this would be her first time, so imagine how she would feel. And really Harry, who knows even less because he's only just recently discovered his heritage of being a wizard and a witch. He would be standing there in absolute awe, I believe. And just the feeling of having all these people watching you as Harry Potter when you've already established that other people seem to know more about you than you do yourself. Her eyes lingered for a moment on Neville's cloak, which was fastened under his left ear, and on Ron's smudged nose. Harry nervously tried to flatten his hair. "I shall return when we are ready for you, Professor McGonagall. Please wait quietly." She left the chamber. Harry swallowed. "How exactly do they sort us into houses?" he asked Ron. "Some type of test, I think. Fred said it hurts a lot, but I think he was joking." Harry's heart gave a horrible jolt. A test? In front of the whole school? But he didn't know any magic yet. What on earth would he have to do? He hadn't expected something like this the moment they arrived. He looked around anxiously and saw that everyone else looked terrified too. No one was talking much except Hermione Granger, who was whispering very fast about all the spells she'd learned and wondering which one she'd need. Harry tried hard not to listen to her. He'd never been more nervous. Never, not even when he'd had to take a school report home to the Dursleys saying that he'd somehow turned his teacher's wig blue. He kept his eyes fixed on the doorway. Any second now, Professor McGonagall would come back and lead him to his dorm. Then something happened which made him jump about a foot into the air. Several people behind him screamed. "What the—" he gasped. So did the people around him. About 20 ghosts had just streamed through the back wall. Pearly white and slightly transparent, they glided across the room talking to each other and hardly glancing at the first years. They seemed to be arguing. What looked like a fat little monk was saying, "Forgive and forget, I say. We ought to give him a second chance." "My dear Friar, haven't we given Peeves all the chances he deserves? He gives us all a bad name, and you know, he's not even really a ghost. I say, what are you all doing here?" A ghost wearing a ruff and tights had suddenly noticed the first years. Nobody answered. "New students," said the fat friar, smiling around them. "About to be sorted, I suppose." A few people nodded mutely. "Hope to see you in Hufflepuff," said the friar. "My old house, you know." "Move along now," said a sharp voice. "The sorting ceremony's about to start." Professor McGonagall had returned. One by one, the ghosts floated through the opposite wall. "Now form a line," Professor McGonagall told the first years, "and follow me." Feeling oddly as though his legs had turned to lead, Harry got into line behind a boy with sandy hair, with Ron behind him, and they walked out of the chamber, back across the hall, and through a pair of double doors into the Great Hall. Harry had never even imagined such a strange and splendid place. It was lit by thousands and thousands of candles, which were floating in mid-air above 4 long tables, where the rest of the students were sitting. These tables were laid with glittering golden plates and goblets. So this is a really good time to listen to what's being read and to visualise all the things you can hear. Try and set the scene for what this great hall would look like. At the top of the hall was another long table where the teachers were sitting. Professor McGonagall led the first years up here so that they came to a halt in a line facing the other students, with the teachers behind them. The hundreds of faces staring at them looked like pale lanterns in the flickering candlelight. Dotted here and there among the students, the ghosts shone misty silver, mainly to avoid all the staring eyes. Harry looked upwards and saw a velvety black ceiling dotted with stars. He heard Hermione whisper, "It's bewitched to look like the sky outside. I read about it in Hogwarts, a history." So think about several reasons why they may be staring at the students. Are they staring at the first years at the front, or are they staring at Harry? And why would they be staring at Harry? It was hard to believe there was a ceiling there at all, and that the Great Hall didn't simply open onto the heavens. Harry quickly looked down against Professor McGonagall silently, as Professor McGonagall silently placed a 4-legged stool in front of the first years. On top of the stool, she put a pointed wizard's hat. The hat was patched and frayed and extremely dirty. Aunt Petunia wouldn't have let it in the house. Maybe they had to try to get a rabbit out of it, Harry thought wildly. That seemed to be the sort of thing. Noticing that everyone in the hall was now staring at the hat, he stared at it too. So obviously Harry himself is making a text-to-world connection. Trying to pull a rabbit out of a hat is something we know and see in movies. We see it in shows on magic. You may have even attended a magic show yourself. So Harry's trying to make his own connections to help him understand what's happening and to understand what will be expected of him. For a few seconds, there was complete silence. Then the hat twitched, a rip near the brim opened wide like a mouth, and the hat began to sing. So forgive me now. Oh, you may not think I'm pretty, but judge on what you see. I'll eat myself if you can find a smarter hat than me. You can keep your bowlers black, your top hats tall, sleek and tall, for I'm the Hogwarts Sorting Hat, and I can cap them all. There's nothing hidden in your head the sorting hat can't see, so try me on and I'll tell you where you ought to be. You might belong to Gryffindor, where dwell the brave at heart, the daring, nerve and chivalry set Gryffindors apart. You might belong in Hufflepuff, Where they are just and loyal, those patient Hufflepuffs are true and unafraid of toil. Or yet in wise old Ravenclaw, if you've a ready mind, where those of wit and learning will always find their kind. Or perhaps in Slytherin you'll make your real friends. Those cunning folks use any means to achieve their ends. So put me on, don't be afraid, and don't get in a flap. You're safe, you're in safe hands, though I have none, for I'm the thinking cap. So I've always been told I'm never a great singer, but I will give it a go, and it stated that the hat began to sing, so that is what I did. So once again, visualising, making that mental picture of what would be happening. This hat would not be talking like a robot, as we used to talk about in primary school, reading word by word. He was singing, so that is what I did. The whole hall burst into applause as the hat finished its song. It bowed to each of the 4 tables and then became quite still again. So we've just got to try on the hat, Ron whispered to Harry. Oh, kill Fred. He said it was going to be about wrestling a troll. Harry smiled weakly. Yes, trying on the hat was a lot better than having to do a spell, but he did wish they could have tried it on without everyone watching. The hat seemed to be asking rather a lot. Harry didn't feel brave or quick-witted or any of it at the moment. If only the hat had mentioned a house for people who felt a bit queasy. That would have been one of those for him. So think about, connect to yourself. Which house do you think you would be put in by the Sorting Hat? Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, or Slytherin? And give your reasons. So you're talking about characteristics of yourself that would put you into that house. Professor McGonagall now stepped forward, holding a long roll of parchment. When I call your name, you'll put on the hat and will sit on the stool to be sorted, she said. Abbott, Hannah. A pink-faced girl with blonde pigtails stumbled out of line, put on the hat, which fell right down over her eyes, and sat for a moment. A moment's pause. Hufflepuff! Shouted the hat. The table on the right cheered and clapped as Hannah went to sit down at the Hufflepuff table. Harry saw the ghost of the fat friar waving merrily at her. Bones, Susan. Hufflepuff! Shouted the hat again, and Susan scuttled off to sit next to Hannah. Boot, Terry. Ravenclaw! The table second from the left clapped this time. Several Ravenclaws stood up to shake hands with Terry as he joined them. Brocklehurst, Mandy went to Ravenclaw too, but Brown, Lavender, became the first new Gryffindor, and the table on the far left exploded with cheers. Harry could see Ron's twin brothers catcalling. Bulstrode, Millicent then became a Slytherin. Perhaps it was Harry's imagination, after he'd heard about Slytherin, but he thought they all looked an unpleasant lot. He was starting to feel definitely sick now. He remembered being picked for teams during sports lessons at his old school. He had always been last to be chosen, not because he was no good, but because no one wanted Dudley to think they liked him. So there's another text to self-connection I can make. I was never one great with sporting ability, so I was one always left last on the list. Finch Fletchley, Justin, Hufflepuff. Sometimes, Harry noticed, the hat shouted at the house at once, but at others it took a little while to decide. Finnegan Seamus, the sandy-haired boy next to Harry in the line, sat on the stool for almost a whole minute before the hat declared him a Gryffindor. Granger, Hermione. Hermione almost ran to the stool and jammed the hat eagerly on her head. Gryffindor! Shouted the hat. Ron groaned. A horrible thought struck Harry, as horrible thoughts always do when you're nervous. What if he wasn't chosen at all? What if he just sat there with the hat over his eyes for ages, until Professor McGonagall jerked it off his head and said there had been obviously a mistake and he'd better get back on the train? When Neville Longbottom, the boy who kept losing his toad, was called, he fell over on his way to the stool. The hat took a long time to decide with Neville. When it finally shouted, Gryffindor! Neville ran off, still wearing it, and had to jog back amid gales of laughter to give it to McDougal Morag. Malfoy swaggered forward when his name was called and got his wish at once. The hat had barely touched his head when it screamed, Slytherin! Malfoy went to join his friends Crabbe and Goyle, looking pleased with himself. There weren't so many people left now. Moon, Knot, Parkinson, then a pair of twin girls, Patil and Patil, then Perks, Sally Ann, and then at last Potter, Harry. As Harry stepped forward, whispers suddenly broke out, like little hissing fires all over the hall. Potter, did he say? The Harry Potter. The last thing Harry saw before the hat dropped over his eyes was the hall full of people craning to get a good look at him. Next second, he was looking at the black inside of the hat. He waited. And so will you until part 2.